When I first awoke, the world was a blur of shadows and pain. My wrists throbbed where the chains bit into them, the cold metal sending waves of agony through my arms. The air around me was thick, damp, and heavy with a smell that I could only describe as ancient, like the scent of earth that had been sealed away for centuries. The chamber was dimly lit by an eerie, greenish glow that seemed to emanate from the very walls, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with every flicker of light. My mind was foggy, struggling to piece together how I had ended up here. Images flashed through my thoughts, Hale's twisted form, the darkness that had swallowed him whole, the towering lighthouse looming over the stormy sea. It all felt like a nightmare, but the pain in my wrists told me it was real. I pulled against the chains again, a futile attempt to free myself. The rusted metal scraped against my skin, drawing blood, but I couldn't stop myself. Panic was starting to set in, the realization that I was trapped in this forsaken place with no clear way out. The whispering that had haunted me earlier was still there, a constant hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls, growing louder with each passing moment. The chains held fast, refusing to budge, and my heart raced with the rising fear that I would never escape. I forced myself to take deep breaths, to calm the storm of panic threatening to overtake me. I needed to think clearly, to find a way out before whatever was lurking in the darkness came for me. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I took in my surroundings. The chamber was small, almost claustrophobic, the walls slick with moisture. Strange symbols were etched into the stone, glowing faintly with the same sickly green light that filled the room. The floor was uneven, made of jagged stone that pressed uncomfortably against my legs whenever I moved. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, a deep, relentless chill that seemed to come from the very ground beneath me. I spotted a narrow passageway in the corner of the chamber, barely visible in the gloom. It was my only chance, the only possible escape from this nightmare. But first, I had to free myself. My eyes scanned the floor, searching for anything that could help me break free of the chains. That's when I saw it, half buried in the muck. Just a few feet away was a small, sharp rock. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I stretched out my arm, my fingers straining to reach the rock. The chains dug deeper into my wrist, sending fresh waves of pain shooting through my arm, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I had to get that rock. After what felt like an eternity, my fingers brushed against the edge of the stone. I twisted my hand, trying to grasp it, but it was just out of reach. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I stretched further, my fingertips scraping against the cold, rough surface. Finally, I managed to hook my fingers around the rock and pull it toward me. I gripped the rock tightly, its jagged edges digging into my palm, and began the painstaking process of sawing through the ropes that bound my wrists. The rock wasn't sharp enough to cut through the ropes easily, and my hands were trembling with cold and exhaustion. Each movement was agonizing, the rough stone tearing at the rope and my skin alike. Time seemed to stretch on, each second an eternity as I worked to free myself. The whispering in the chamber grew louder, more insistent, as if the very walls were aware of my struggle. I could feel the presence of something watching me, lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to falter. But I couldn't let myself stop. I had to get free. After what felt like hours, the ropes finally began to fray. With one last desperate effort, I sawed through the last strand, and my wrists were free. I nearly collapsed with relief, my arms trembling from the effort, but I knew I couldn't stop now. I had to keep moving. With my wrists free, I quickly turned my attention to the chains around my legs. The rock was barely holding up, its edges dulled from the relentless sawing, but I had no other choice. I worked at the chains, trying to pry them loose, to find some weakness in the rusted metal. It was slow, excruciating work. The chains were thick, the metal old but stubbornly resilient. My fingers were numb with cold, and the sharp pain in my wrists had dulled to a persistent, throbbing ache. But I kept at it, refusing to give in to the hopelessness that threatened to overwhelm me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one of the chains gave way with a loud, metallic snap. The sudden release of tension sent me sprawling to the ground, but I didn't care. I was free. I scrambled to my feet, my legs unsteady beneath me, and stumbled toward the narrow passageway in the corner of the chamber. The whispering grew louder as I approached, a maddening chorus of voices that seemed to echo in my very mind. But I couldn't let it stop me. I had to get out. The passageway was even narrower than it had appeared, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. The walls pressed in on me from all sides, slick with moisture and rough against my skin. I could feel the cold stone scraping against my back as I moved, the jagged edges tearing at my clothes. The air grew colder as I descended, each step taking me deeper into the bowels of the lighthouse. The whispering seemed to follow me, growing louder and more insistent with each step I took. It was as if the very walls were alive, pulsing with the voices of the damned, each one more desperate than the last. I tried to block out the voices, to focus on the task at hand. But it was nearly impossible. The whispering was everywhere, surrounding me, filling my mind with thoughts that weren't my own. I could feel it gnawing at my sanity, threatening to drive me to the brink. But I had to keep moving. I had to get out of this place before it. The passageway twisted and turned, a labyrinthine tunnel that seemed to stretch on forever. I had no sense of direction, no idea where I was headed, but I kept going, driven by the sheer instinct to survive. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding in my chest, but I forced myself to keep moving, to put one foot in front of the other. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the passageway began to widen. The walls fell away, and I found myself standing at the edge of a vast, open chamber. The chamber was massive, far larger than any room I had encountered in the lighthouse so far. The ceiling was lost in darkness, the walls lined with hundreds, no, thousands, of stones, each one engraved with strange symbols that glowed faintly with the same sickly green light that had filled the chamber where I had been held. In the center of the chamber was a pool of water, its surface dark and still. It was as if the water itself was absorbing the light, pulling it into its depths and leaving nothing but darkness in its wake. And standing at the edge of the pool, his back to me, was Thomas Hale. But this was not the same man I had seen before. He was taller now, his body more solid, more real. The water dripped from his clothes, pooling at his feet, and as I watched, he began to turn toward me. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, helpless as Hale turned to face me. His eyes were black, empty voids that seemed to suck in the light around them. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile. He looked at me, his gaze piercing through me as if he could see into my very soul. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and I realized with a sickening dread that the voices were coming from him. Hale, if that was still his name, was speaking, chanting in a language I couldn't understand, his voice merging with the countless others that filled the chamber. I tried to back away, but it was too late. The water in the pool began to ripple, the surface breaking as something began to rise from its depths. It was massive, a shape that defied description, its form shifting and changing with every moment. Hale stepped forward, his eyes locked on mine, and I knew what was coming. I knew that whatever had taken him was about to take me too, to drag me down into the darkness where I would be lost forever. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. With every ounce of strength I had left, I turned and ran. My feet slipped on the wet stone, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I fled back down the passageway. The whispering followed me, growing louder and more frenzied with every step I took. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I burst out of the passageway, back into the chamber where I had been held captive. The chains still lay on the ground, a stark reminder of how close I had come to losing everything. But I didn't stop. I ran for the exit, the sound of my own heartbeat drowning out the whispers as I tore through the dark corridors of the lighthouse. The walls seemed to close in around me as I fled, the shadows shifting and writhing as if alive. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, but I kept running. I had to get out. Finally, I saw the faint light of the entrance ahead. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning with the effort, and with one last burst of energy, I threw myself through the doorway and out into the open air. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. The storm had passed, the sky above clear and bright, but I could still feel the darkness pressing in on me, as if it was trying to pull me back. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking beneath me. I had escaped the lighthouse, but I knew that the darkness was still there, lurking just below the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. I had to get out of Blackwater Bay. I had to find help, to warn others of the darkness that lay hidden within the lighthouse. But as I turned to leave, I heard it, a low, rumbling growl that sent a chill down my spine. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. There, standing at the edge of the forest, was a figure cloaked in shadow. I couldn't make out its features, but I could feel its eyes on me, burning with an unnatural intensity. It was watching me, waiting. And then, with a sudden, violent movement, it lunged at me. I stumbled back, my foot catching on a loose stone, and I fell to the ground. The figure was on me in an instant, its cold, clammy hands wrapping around my throat. I fought back, struggling against the creature with everything I had, but it was too strong. Its grip tightened, cutting off my air, and I felt the darkness closing in around me. As I slipped into unconsciousness, the last thing I saw was the figure's face, twisted into a grotesque smile, its eyes burning with a malevolent fire. When I awoke, I found myself in a place that felt like a dream, a surreal landscape that hovered somewhere between reality and nightmare. The world around me was bathed in a strange, otherworldly light, casting long shadows that twisted and warped in impossible ways. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of salt and decay, and every breath felt like an effort. I was no longer in the lighthouse, nor was I in Blackwater Bay. This was a place I couldn't fully comprehend, a realm that seemed to exist beyond the boundaries of the world I knew. The sky above was a swirling mass of dark clouds, and the ground beneath me was a mixture of sand and jagged rocks, as if I were standing on the shore of some forgotten ocean. I rose to my feet, every muscle aching, and looked around. The landscape stretched out endlessly in every direction, a barren wasteland of shadows and whispers. The only feature that stood out was a towering structure in the distance, a lighthouse, identical to the one in Blackwater Bay, but twisted, distorted, as if seen through a shattered mirror. There was no sign of the creature that had attacked me, no sign of life at all. But I could feel its presence, a dark, malevolent force that seemed to permeate the very air around me. The whispering was there too, softer now, but constant, a low, droning chant that seemed to come from the lighthouse itself. I didn't know how I had ended up in this place, nor did I know how to escape. But I knew that the lighthouse held the answers, that whatever had brought me here was connected to it in some way. I began to walk, each step a struggle against the unnatural weight of the air. The ground shifted beneath my feet, the sand giving way to jagged rocks that cut into my boots, but I pressed on. The lighthouse loomed closer with each step, its twisted form growing larger, more imposing. As I approached, I noticed something strange, figures moving around the base of the lighthouse, their forms barely visible in the dim light. They were human in shape, but there was something off about them, something unnatural. Their movements were jerky, as if they were being pulled by invisible strings, and their faces were obscured by shadows. I hesitated, unsure of whether to approach or flee. But as I watched, the figures turned toward me, their eyes glowing with the same greenish light that filled the lighthouse in Blackwater Bay. They began to move toward me, their movements stiff and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by a puppet master. Panic surged through me, and I turned to run. But as I did, the ground beneath me shifted, and I stumbled, falling to my knees. The figures were almost upon me, their eyes locked on mine, and I could see now that their faces were twisted, contorted into expressions of pain and despair. I scrambled to my feet, but it was too late. The figures surrounded me, their cold, clammy hands reaching out to grab me. I tried to fight them off, but there were too many of them, their grip like iron. As they closed in, I heard the whispering again, louder now, almost deafening. The figures were chanting in unison, their voices merging with the whispers to create a cacophony of sound that threatened to overwhelm me. But just as I thought I would be consumed by the darkness, the whispering stopped. The figures froze, their grip on me loosening, and I saw something move in the distance, another figure, standing at the edge of the wasteland, watching.